And today we're going to be learning Megillah Daf Zayin. You'll see further on in the daf. It's one of my favorite dafim. It's kind of like the Gemara is making fun of all sorts of things and having a good laugh in the middle of Masechet Purim. You always think of Purim Torah, so today's daf is going to have it. Today's daf is sponsored by Norman Eliasar in honor of his wife Shira Eliasar and her birthday. Happy birthday to Shira, my wife, favorite chavruta and favorite teacher. Mazal tov. Today's daf is also sponsored by Becky Goldstein in loving memory of her father Yoel ben Meir Frum. He was a lone Holocaust survivor who, although arriving in Canada with no family or emotional support at the age of 19, still believed that Hakol L'Tova. He dedicated his life to Torah and Gemilut Chasadim. Any advice he gave was always spiced with examples of Midrashim and Agadot. He challenged my thirst for learning and by encouraging my independent thinking. I miss his music, his nigunim, his mirot, and his stories. He was my guiding light. Yehi Zichro Baruch. Okay, we're going to start kind of in the middle of a sugya. We ended the daf yesterday with drashot, or different opinions about Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, okay, where we have 2 months, which is the month where we're supposed to read the Megillah. And one says, right, we actually have 3 opinions, but we're going to focus now on 2. The one that says the main reading is in Adar Rishon, and the one who said the main reading is in Adar Sheni. And then we said, right, the reasons, B'chol Shana V'Shana, it's like every year Adar comes after Shvat. Or is it every year Adar comes before Nisan? So which way do you read it? And then we had some other reasons, which was either Eim Avirin ala mitzvot, as soon as the mitzvah comes to your hand, go do it. That would be Adar Rishon. And Adar Sheni would be because we ended the daf with Mismach Geula leGeula Adif. Better to say have Geula next to Geula. We want to have Purim close to Pesach, redemption. Then we also brought another pasuk, which was, and that's where we ended, and that's where we're going to start today, which was the Kayem et Igeret HaPurim Hazot Hashenit. Okay, it says at the end of the Megillah, they sent out another letter to do Purim, this Hashenit, the second. What does it mean, the second? So they say, oh, it means the second month. Okay, it means do it in the second month if it comes out 2 months of Adar. So now the Gemara tells us, if you can learn it from that pasuk, why do you learn it from B'chol Shana V'Shana? And we now have 2 verses that prove Rav Moshe ben Gamliel, to which the Gemara says, "V'itzrich lemichtav hashenit, v'itzrich lemichtav b'chol shana v'shana." We actually need both. Okay, why do we need both pasukim? This is a classic itzrich where we say, if you only had one, I would have thought this, and if you only had the other, I would have thought that, and therefore you need both. The combination teaches us exactly what we're looking to learn. So here goes. Itzrich lemichtav b'chol shana v'shana. You needed the one that says every year. Why? De'imi b'chol shana v'shana. Hava Amina. Sorry, you need them. I read it wrong. You need both. Okay, but now we're going to say, Hava, if you had Imi B'chol Shana V'Shana, if you only had that one. Okay, we're now going to say why you need the Hashenit one. If you only had B'chol Shana V'Shana, Hava Amina Kikushan. You could have raised the question of, what about Eim Avirin ala Mitzvot? Or theoretically, you could say B'chol Shana V'Shana, like every year, it could be Adar comes after Shvat. So that wouldn't help you. Therefore, Kamash Malan Hashenit. That's why you needed that pasuk of Hashenit, the second, to say it's the second month. But Yashmin and Hashenit, so the better option would then be, okay, so just put Hashenit. That would be a good way to prove it then. Well, Hava Amina, I would have thought if you only had that verse, Batchila Barishonu Basheni. You would have thought maybe ideally you're supposed to do it both months. You're supposed to read Megillah on the 14th of Adar Rishon and on the 14th of Adar Sheni. That's why it teaches you, do it like you do it every year, which is every year is once. Therefore, here you do it once as well. So that's why we need the combination. Now we're left with the question, what about Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yossi, who holds that it's in the first month? Hi, Hashenit, my Avile. What does he do with this pasuk Hashenit? Hashenit clearly doesn't mean for him the second month, because he says you do it in the first month. He needs it for this halacha that Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda says, which is Damar Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda, B'tchila kava'ua, not exactly a halacha, but a statement that he made. B'tchila kava'ua b'Shushan u'lebasof b'chol ha'olam kulo. Originally, they instituted it first as a holiday in Shushan, and when they sent out this igeret, l'kayem et igeret hapurim hazot hasheni, that was to tell you, you also have to do it in the unwalled cities, not just in Shushan. This, by the way, if you remember, I quoted the Ramban, who basically says, right, the Rambam, this fits perfectly with the Rambam. The main mitzvah was in Shushan, the main saving, the main miracle, and the others was secondary. The Ramban says the opposite, that the main thing was in the unwalled cities because they were the most unprotected. So this doesn't really work with the Ramban. So what do you say to the Ramban? what would he say to this? He would just say he holds like the other opinion, that Hasheni doesn't teach you that. Hasheni teaches you, say it in Adar Sheni, and then this doesn't contradict the Ramban at all, right? So, and it's clear here, someone mentioned to me, they were very confused with the whole chronology. It's clear about what exactly happened in the Megillah in terms of, it's clear that there's a lack of clarity about, was the main thing in Prazim, was the main thing in the walled cities, what was the progression of how this holiday developed over the first few years right after, if you read that last chapter of Esther, it's not really very clear. Okay, Amar Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, since we just mentioned something he said, we're now going to mention something else that he talks about, which is a very basic question. Is Esther, and we'll see some other books, are they supposed to be part of the canonization of the 24 books of the Tanakh? Okay, there was a debate regarding a number of books. Okay, if you notice, if you talk about Purim is always compared to Hanukkah, and the books about Hanukkah, Sefrei Maccabim, are not part of the canonization, right? They're not there. They're not in a Sefer Tanakh, and it's a very good question as to how Esther got in there. There's a whole bunch of reasons why to raise questions. First of all, it's more like a story. It's not exactly the same thing. Shem Hashem does not appear there at all, God's name, right? Some people make of it a whole, right, that it's a Nes Nistar, it was all hidden miracle, and there's all sorts of references to that. But some people said, what do you mean? God's name isn't here. And we'll see there's a debate. Was it written by Rocha Kodesh or not? Was this a holy book, or was this just a story told? If, in light of what we learned about Megillah Ta'anit, that at some point they made all sorts of days and all sorts of miracles happened to the Jewish people. Also, it didn't happen in Israel. We didn't go back to full autonomy, which is all the reasons why we don't say Hallel on that day. So what made this book become part of the Tanakh? It's a very good question, right? We're so used to that it's part of the Tanakh, but they're going to raise questions, and not only on this, but on other books as well that are part of our Tanakh. Questionable, are they really supposed to be part of Tanakh or not? And you'll see that in the time of the Tanaim, this was a big debate. So again, it's hard for us to imagine, but we're so used to it. But again, you have to realize that when you learn the Gemara, you learn about all sorts of things that weren't so clear. To us, they're now clear, but back then they weren't. So, according to Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda, Esther sent a message to the rabbis saying, "Kava'uni lidorot," right? I want my holiday to be set in stone for all the future generations. Shachula kin'a at meoreret aleinu levein ha'umot. Okay, so first of all, what does she want exactly? Maybe she wants it just to be written up. We don't know exactly what she's asking for here. It comes the rabbis and they say to her, listen, if we make this a holiday or we write this book down and put it in our Tanakh, what will happen? You're causing jealousy between us and the other nations. We're basically celebrating a victory over killing all of these Gentile neighbors. That's going to create a lot of tension between us and them. To which she responds, and this is all based on a verse at the very end of Megillah Esther. Shachalahem, okay, the second to last pasuk says, if you want to know the rest of the Tokfo, the strength, and the Gvura of Mordechai, go look in Sefer Divrei Yamim L'Malchut Paras U'Madai. Go look in their chronicles of the Persians and the Medians. You can find it all there. Now, it's a very strange verse to be in our Megillah. Why is our Megillah telling us this? So here, they darshan this to say that it was a conversation she had with the rabbis, and the rabbis said, we don't want to put this. It's going to be, we're going to have an issue with all the Gentiles that they're going to say, oh, look, you're claiming you killed us all. So what does she say? All of this is already written. So it doesn't matter whether we write it or not. It's written in their books. So it's not like we're adding anything to what they already wrote about. And there specifically, it says Hagvura, right, the Gvurato and all that, which is all about the battle. So basically, she says your reason is not a good reason. Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chaviva Matan. Okay, the following four rabbis together said the following. They had a braita that we're going to quote right now. But before we quote it, we're going to point out one minor correction about the line I just said, which is B'kulei Seder Moed. Everywhere in Seder Moed, which is what we're learning now, right? All the holidays, the Seder that includes that. Kol ki hai zuga. Chalufei Rabbi Yochanan u'ayil Rabbi Yonatan. When you have this pair, which is not really a pair, is usually two. When you have this foursome, take out, when it says Rabbi Yochanan, it's a mistake, it's Rabbi Yonatan. Okay, that's just a matter of who said it. You see how important it is for them to know who said what and how important that is. So now, so here's what they said. So again, Esther says, put me down, I don't want to be written for generations. Shachula Halo katavti lach shalishim. They quote her the following pasuk from Mishlei, Proverbs, that says, I wrote you shalishim. I wrote you 3 times. Shalishim velo reva'im. They say to her, look, your story, which is really rooted in a previous story in the Torah, which is the fight, the battle against Amalek, because Haman came from Amalek. That story is already written 3 times. And it says in Mishlei, you can only write things 3 times. 3 times means 3 and not 4. So here says, where is it written 3 times, right? So first they said 3 times and not 4. Ad shematzulo mikra katuv b'Torah, until they found a verse written in the Torah that they could darshan and then explain that we actually can include Esther in the Sifrei Tanakh. Now, how is this? So says, Ad shematzulo mikra katuv b'Torah, ktov zot zikaron b'sefer. This is in the battle of Amalek, when they win the battle with Amalek, right after they get out of Egypt. It says, write this down as a zikaron in my book. So now, ktov zot, what does it mean, write this down? Mash katuv kan uve mishneh Torah. In other words, write this means write this, what we just said here in Shemot, write it again in Sefer Dvarim, in Mishneh Torah. Right? That's when Moshe recounts everything that happened, and he talks there also, right, at what Amalek did. That's in Parshat Kitetse. So he says, Ktov Zot is both in the Torah twice. Okay, it's saying write this again. Then Zikaron is, and therefore that counts as 1. Both references in the Torah to Amalek really count as only 1. Then we have Zikaron, Mashkatu b'Nevi'im, Basefer, Mashkatu b'Megillah. So because it says Ktov Zot Zikaron b'Sefer, Ktov Zot counts really as 1. Write this again. Then put it as a Zikaron in the Nevi'im. And then the Sefer, what's Sefer? Oh, that's Ktuvim. That's in Megillah Esther. So now they say, Kitanai. Actually, this whole thing about whether Esther is supposed to be part of the Tanakh or not, we see now the rabbis darshaned it according to, right, this Fortsum basically brought this Breita that said, Esther won. She ended up becoming established forever in the canonization of the Tanakh. But this whole thing is Kitanai. It's actually a Tanaitic debate. Not everybody agrees. And we're now going to see a machlokah between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Elazar HaModai. Rabbi Yeshua is going to say no. And Rabbi Elazar HaModai is going to say, like we just said, that it does belong here. So here comes the machlokah Tanaim. Ktov Zot, the machlokah Tanaim had a darshan this pasuk. Ktov Zot is mashkatuv kan. According to Rabbi Yeshua, the first opinion here, Ktov Zot means write it right here. That's in Sefer Shemot. Zikaron, have a memory of it. What's that? Mashkatuv Mishneh Torah. That's the second reference in the Torah. So that's already 2. B'Sefer, Mashkatuv b'Nevi'im, and now we're not left with any option to add Megillat Esther. That's Divrei Rabbi Yeshua. But Rabbi Elazar HaModai Omer, exactly as we said before, Ktov Zot Mashkatuv kan uve Mishneh Torah, Zikaron Mashkatuv b'Nevi'im, B'Sefer Mashkatuv b'Megillah. So he says exactly as we said a minute ago, which is you really have room for all 4, because really all 4 count as 3. So there's this big debate about how to read that verse. How many times is this supposed to be mentioned? 3 times, right? Or can it be 4 that really count as 3? And that's the debate. Again, they don't really get into why, yes, they don't get into the background, just the philosophical argument about why to put this in or why not to put it in. Here it almost sounds like it's just repetitive. We've already talked about this battle of Amalek. We don't need to mention it again. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel. The conversation is going to continue here. So Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Esther eina mitamat hayadayim. Esther doesn't make your hands tameh. What on earth does that mean? Why would Esther make your hands tameh? It obviously doesn't mean Esther. It means the Megillah Esther. It means if you touch the Megillah, your hands become tameh. What on earth are they talking about? Why, if you touch a Megillah, do your hands become tameh? So there's actually 2 reasons given as to why this is. And this is really a way of saying Sefer Torah, Sifrei Torah, anything that's part of the Tanakh is what we call Matamei Yadayim. There's 2 reasons for this. One is a simple reason they didn't want people to touch it directly. They wanted people to treat it with sanctity and not to touch it directly. And therefore they said it's going to make your hands tameh. And then, you won't want to touch it if it's going to make your hands tameh. But the main reason is that they used to, and it's a fascinating reason, they used to store the truma, which is sanctified. They would store it with the Sifrei Kodesh because Sifrei Kodesh are sanctified and the truma has sanctity to it. Remember, we learned all about the sanctity of truma many times, and it has to be kept b'tahara. So if you want to keep it b'tahara, what better place to store it than with your Sifrei Kodesh? What's the problem? If you put food near Sifrei Kodesh, the mice are going to get there. So once the mice come, what are they going to do when they get to your food? They're going to eat your food and they're going to eat through your Sifrei Kodesh. And then they had holes in their Sifrei Kodesh. So they said, oh, this is not a good idea. So what did they say? They're mitame yadayim, and not only that, they're mitame the truma. If they touch the truma, they'll make the truma tameh, and they'll make your hands tameh, so that people wouldn't store the truma next to the Sifrei Kodesh, because if your hands become tameh, and then when you touch Sifrei Kodesh and you're right near the truma, you might touch the truma, make the truma impure. So basically, this was a gzera the rabbis instituted, either number one, to prevent people, from touching it in general and saying this is sacred, we should keep our distance. And number two, from avoiding this problem of people who thought that it was a good idea to store the truma with the Sifrei Kodesh. Okay, so now it reminds me of, I was in the Far East and I had a Toblerone chocolate bar I bought and I was saving it. I was eating a little bit at a time. And then one day I see a whole slew of ants going into my closet. They were also obviously trying to eat the Toblerone chocolate bar. So, it's this idea, wherever you put food, you're going to attract creatures. So it makes a lot of sense. Although it's a kind of funny thing to think that when you see this mitamei yadayim, you don't really think about mice, but that's really where it came from. So when he says Esther mitamei yadayim, what he means is this doesn't belong in the Sifrei Tanakh. So now, right, it's not a sanctified book. So now the Gemara is going to question this. Is it because you think Shmuel holds that it's not Beruach HaKodesh? It wasn't said with the divine, right? It's almost like a kind of prophecy. It wasn't written with some kind of divine inspiration, divine prophecy. V'hamar Shmuel, Esther Beruach HaKodesh Nemra. He says it was written Beruach HaKodesh. So why wouldn't he put it into the Tanakh? So what does he say? When Shmuel said it was Beruach HaKodesh, it was said Beruach HaKodesh, ne'emra likhot v'lo ne'emra lichtov. This is a bit of a strange line, not strange, but hard to understand. It was said Beruach HaKodesh in order to be read, but not in order to be written. Okay, so now how can something be read if it's not written? So two possibilities. Either it's like we talk about Torah she'b'al peh, what we call the oral Torah, which we wrote down eventually, but it wasn't supposed to be written down, right? Only because everything was getting lost, and that's why we wrote it down. But it wasn't supposed to be written down. Maybe the Megillah was supposed to be passed down by tradition, and not by oral tradition, and not written down, just like other things. That's possible, and that's what it means, ne'amar likhot, but not lichtov. Or alternatively, it could mean it was meant to be written down and recited in shul, which is strange for us to think about. It's something would be a Sefer Kodesh, and yet we read it in shul without it being a Sefer Kodesh. It was meant to be read in shul and therefore written down, but it wasn't meant to be written as part of a book of Tanakh. That's a possibility. It's not clear what this means. Meitive. Now we're going to have a question on Shmuel. Does Shmuel really say that Esther doesn't belong in the Tanakh? Now Shmuel's an Emora, and that seems to contradict different Tanaitic opinions. Rabbi Meir Omer, Kohelet eino mitamei hayadayim, umachloket b'shir hashirim. Here we're going to see all the other books that there was a debate about. Rabbi Meir says Kohelet not mitamei yadayim, meaning it shouldn't be part of the canonization. Umachloket b'shir hashirim. There's a debate about Shiur Shiurim. The Shiur Shiurim is a love song, right? Some people say it's a love song. A love song doesn't belong in Tanakh. Other people say no, it's an allegory for the relationship between the Jewish people and God. In fact, it's Rabbi Akiva who says Shiur Shiurim is Kodesh Kodeshim. It's the most holy because it's discussing our relationship with God, and it's the most holy. So you have, from one extreme to the other. Kohelet, what's the debate about Kohelet? One opinion we're going to see here. Another one appears in all sorts of other places, which is that Kohelet seems to have a lot of inherent contradictions. He says, on the one hand, enjoy your youth because, why not? And the other one, he says it's all hevel and you shouldn't enjoy your youth, and there's all these contradictory verses. And because of that, we'll see that the Gemara in general spends a lot of time dealing with contradictory verses in Kohelet. Because of that, it was a difficult book, and people were going to say, what kind of book is this? It says one thing, and then it says the opposite, and people won't understand the depths of it, and therefore they'll misunderstand it, and therefore they didn't want it. Here we're going to see a different reason. We'll get there in a minute, but right now we have Rabbi Meir who says Kohelet is not in, and there's a machloket about Shiur Shiurim. Rabbi Yossi Omer, Shiur Shiurim mitamei hayadayim, Shiur Shiurim is in, machloket beKohelet. He has the reverse opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, Kohelet mikulei Beit Shammai muchumrei Beit Hillel. Okay, now to say it's a kula of Beit Shammai, it means it's not part of the Tanakh, and therefore we can be lenient. It doesn't make your hands impure, whereas it's the chumrah of Beit Hillel because he includes it, and therefore he considers it more. It would be mitamei yadayim. It would make your hands impure. Aval Ruth v'shir hashirim ve'Esther mitamei yadayim. However, according to Rabbi Shimon, Ruth, interesting that was also a debatable book, and Shira Shirim and Esther are all Matamim Tayadayim. Those are all part of it. No, it doesn't say it was a debate about root, but the fact he has to mention it maybe shows that maybe there were people who had some doubts about it. But overall, what do we see here? According to all the opinions, nobody debates really Esther, because he says it's Matamim Yadayim and nobody said it isn't. So how could Shmuel go against these opinions? To which we answer, what do you mean? We already saw a Tanaitic opinion that he holds by, which is Huda Amar Rabbi Yeshua. We already saw Tov Zotzi Karam B'Sefer, according to Rabbi Yeshua, excluded Esther, and Esther is not part of it. And we could just say Shmuel holds by that opinion. Now we're going to bring another bright on this topic, getting off topic a little bit into Kohelet. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Kohelet eino metameh et hayadayim, mipnei shechochmato shel Shlomo hi. It's just wise words from Shlomo. That's not it's wise words from Shlomo. It's not Ruach HaKodesh, and it's Sifrei Tanakh are supposed to be things that were by divine inspiration. Amru lo v'chizo bilvad amal v'lo kvar ne'amal v'yidaber shloshet alafim mashal ve'omer al tosef al dvarav. They said to Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe, "What are you talking about?" Shlomo said a lot of things. Some of them were by divine inspiration, and some of them were not. And the ones that were by divine inspiration were the ones that made it into Kohelet. How do we know that? We don't exactly know it. But it says in Sefer Mishlei, It says in Sefer Melachim, it says by Yidaber that Shlomo spoke 3,000 mashal, and his shiur, his songs, was 1,005. Now, in Kohelet, you don't have that many statements, so it must be that he chose the ones that were by divine inspiration, and those made it into the book, and the other ones didn't. And the second pasuk they used to prove it is al tosef al dvarav. Don't add to anything he says, meaning, now this is in Sefer Mishlei. The actual reason, the shot of this pasuk is it's talking about don't add anything to what God says, don't add on to his mitzvot, like lo yosif and lo yigara and all that. We learned in the Torah. And that's what it's referring to. But the drasha on it is that Shlomo is saying, don't add on to anything that I put in these books, because these were the only ones that were said by divine inspiration. So therefore, the rabbis go against Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe and say, no, it really was written Ruach HaKodesh. So now, Maiva Omer, why do you need both psukim? You could have just had one. So they say, it's not the best proof, but they say if you just had the first pasuk that he wrote 3,000, mashalim, then you could say Shlomo just randomly chose, or maybe not randomly, but definitely not necessarily having to do with Ruach HaKodesh. He chose these are going in my book and these are not going in my book, right? He took the top X number and said these are going in my book. It's not necessarily that it was by divine inspiration, but al tosef al dvarav, don't add to what I wrote. Maybe because that verse is really talking about God. And therefore, when they darshan it to talk about Shlomo, it's saying that's connected with divine inspiration. Tanya. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, again, continuing in this topic, now we're going to say very interesting proofs. How do we know that Esther was written by Ruach HaKodesh? Okay, this is going to be kind of, I think, a little bit funny and interesting. So they're going to bring a slew of proofs. And then they're going to say that basically we can have explanations for all these that they weren't necessarily written Ruach HaKodesh, except for one. One we can't really argue against. So here's our list. How do we know Esther Ruach HaKodesh? Shenemar, Vayomer Haman b'libo. Haman said in his heart, what did he say? Remember when the king says, what should you do for someone that I want to honor? And what did Haman say? Obviously, who does the king want to honor if not me, right? And then he suggests, go bring the horse and the king's horse and the king's clothes and all that. So how did the narrator, or whoever was writing the book, know that Haman said this in his heart? Nobody knows what people think in their heart. So it must be Ruach HaKodesh. Next proof. Okay, we're going to go through all the proofs and then we'll start rejecting them one by one. Rabbi Akiva Omer. Esther Ruach HaKodesh ne'amra shene'amar v'ti Esther noset chen b'nei kol ro'ea. Everybody thought she was beautiful. Now, how did we know what everybody thought? If not, that we had, right, Ruach HaKodesh who told us what everybody was thinking. Rabbi Meir Omer, Esther Ruach HaKodesh ne'amra shene'amar v'yivadaha davar leMordechai. It was known to Mordechai, the Bigtan and Teresh wanted to kill the king. How on earth would he know if not divine inspiration? That one's a little different because that's not how it was written. That was how Mordechai heard. Rabbi Yossi ben Dormas Kitomer, Esther Ruach HaKodesh ne'amra shene'amar u'babiza lo shachu et yadam. It says at the end, in all the battles that were in all the medidot of the king, right? Everywhere the people were fighting, nobody took anything from the shalom. Now, how would you know that if not Ruach HaKodesh? What, you're going to have someone who went around to all the places where the Jews were fighting to notice that nobody took from the booty of the war? So must be Ruach HaKodesh. Amar Shmuel, after we have all these opinions of different Tanaim, comes Shmuel, who's an Amora, living after, and he says, if I was there when they were having the discussion, I would have had something better to say than all of them. Now, we understood this to mean the Jews accepted the Torah a second time. But here's a different drasha on kimu v'kiblu. Why the double language? That's why people compare it, the drasha, to naseh v'nishma. It's very similar to this double language. But here's a different drasha. Kimu lemala masha kiblu lemata. Up above, right, when Mordechai and the Beit Din decided to make this a holiday, up above in the heavens, they agreed to what was done down below. Now, how would you possibly know what was agreed up above, if not Ruach HaKodesh? So that's why he says mine is much better than all the rest. And we'll see in the end that you really can't knock out his opinion, obviously, unless you don't accept his drasha. But once you accept his drasha, then it's clear that there was clearly divine inspiration. So Amarava, Lekului lepircha levad mishmuel, midishmuel, delay lepircha. All of these we can knock out, other than Shmuel's. Well, really, if you really take his drasha seriously, you have to say this Ruach HaKodesh. So here go one by one in order that we had them. And then we'll see two extra opinions after this. It's just logical that Haman would say that in his heart. When the king asked him, who else is so great other than Haman? He was the top number one guy of the king. So first of all, it's just logical that he would say that. And furthermore, and the fact that he started saying, bring the king's horse and bring the king, he obviously knew it was going to be him and therefore started saying, let's bring the best of the best, right? And it's really hard to understand the Megillah otherwise. So that's just logical. That's not Rocha Kodesh. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that that's what Haman was thinking in his heart. The Rabbi Akiva, what about his opinion? Dilma, right? He said that Esther was found beautiful in everybody's eyes. Well, how will we know that? Well, maybe we hold like Rabbi Elazar. He understood. Everybody thought that she looked like one of theirs. Okay, this is right. People find normally people beautiful when they look familiar to them, right? People say you marry someone who looks like one of your siblings often, and right, there's this familiarity. And everybody looked at her. I was thinking the way the Mona Lisa, everybody thinks her eyes are following you. Like everybody looked at Esther and felt she looked like their nation. Okay, that was this miracle that happened. And that's why she was Nosechen. And Rashi even says, now, how would you know this? What everybody was thinking? Because everybody said, oh, she's one of us. She's one of us. Okay, I was thinking when you have like sport and, and somebody does something well, you go, Hi Mishalanu. In Hebrew, we say that, right? And that's what Rashi says here. It's very funny. He says, right, Hi Mishalanu means she's one of ours, okay? Or Hu Mishalanu. He's one of ours. So anyway, I'm thinking of he because I go to my daughter's basketball games and that's what they always shout. So anyway, they say here, Rashi says that everybody was saying Hi Mishalanu, okay, that she's one of ours. So you end up having here this outward display of the fact that everybody knew that everybody wanted to be with her, wanted to said she was like us. Therefore, we knew that. We don't need Rocha Kodesh to tell us that. Now, what about Mordechai knowing how that they were going to plot to kill the king? They were Tarsim, and Mordechai knew their language. How did he know the language of Tarsi? Because another Gemara talks about that he was part of the Sanhedrin, and everyone in the Sanhedrin needs to know 70 languages. So he knew their language. They thought he didn't. That's how he knew, not by Ruach HaKodesh. He overheard their conversation. What about the fact that they knew that nobody took from the booty? Maybe each place where they were fighting sent a messenger back to the center, and they told them, oh, we didn't take the booty. We didn't take any of the booty. We didn't take, right? And then the word got around. But if you say that in the heavens they agreed to this, well, obviously you can't say that other than saying it was Ruach HaKodesh. Amar Ravina, and Ravina says, Hainu da'amri Nashe, we had this actually not so long ago, same line, Tavachad pilpita charifta mimale tzane kare. Better to have one small, very sharp pepper than a whole basket full of gourd. Okay, because you could have all these rabbis, that's great, but you have one small one who's smaller than them because he wasn't even a Tana, but he's very charif, he was very sharp. He is clearly better than the rest of them. Rav Yosef Amar Mehacha, two more reasons. From the end of the Megillah, it says, they will never end, okay? We'll always be celebrating these days of Purim. It's fun to read this when you're living now, right? They said this many, many years ago, and we are still celebrating Purim. How would they possibly know that if not Rocha Kodesh, right? How could they know what would happen in the future? Same, just the next one is the same idea. And their memory will never be lost from their future generations. So again, if you're talking about the future generations, the only way to know that would be Ruach HaKodesh told them that. Okay, now we're moving to the funnier part of today's daf. First, a little bit serious, and then we'll get to funny. Umatanot le'evyonim. So now the question is, how many mishloach manot and how many matanot le'evyonim? For some strange reason, most people, I don't know, maybe not you, but many people think that you're supposed to give two mishlochei manot, two mishlochei manot, meaning to two different people, and each one has to have two different things. Actually, I won't get into the different bracha, which doesn't appear anywhere here and not in most of the commentaries either. I don't know where that comes from. But Tani Rav Yosef, umishloch manot, in fact, in the Shulchan Aruch, it says you could bring two types of meat to someone where it's clear it's the same blessing. So just so you know that I'm not just saying it, but it's very clear. Anyway, Tani Rav Yosef, umishloch manot ish l're'ehu, because it says mishloach is singular and manot is plural, right? One sending of plural manot. So it's actually shtei manot li'ish echad. You only have to give to one person, okay? Two portions to one person. Matanot le'evyonim, notice both are plural. Gifts to poor people in plural. So shtei matanot l'shnei bnei adam. There you have to give two gifts to two different people. Now we're going to hear some stories about people who sent mishlochei manot. The first one, there's many different versions of the story. And in fact, the Yerushalmi, it appears in a totally different version. And there's various halachic conclusions you can come to based on what version of the text you have. Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya, he was the grandson of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi. Shadr leil Rabbi Yoshaya, itma de'igla tilti. He sent to Rabbi Yoshaya a leg of a calf. De'igla tilta, a third calf. There's a whole, usually the shlishi is the nicest one. Bigarba dechamra, and a small jug of wine. He sends back to him, you basically fulfilled your obligation, both a mishloach manot and a matanot le'evyonim, because he was basically, again, according to this reading, he was poor, Rabbi Yoshaya, and he basically says, by sending me these two manot, you basically fulfilled also mishloach manot and also matanot le'evyonim. Now, part of the problem with this is he didn't fulfill matanot le'evyonim because he had to bring more than one. And okay, if you notice, there's two aleph next to the matanot le'evyonim. There's different versions here. Some people say it just says kiyamta bana rabbeinu mishloach manot. Now it's a little bit strange. If I send you mishloach manot, you're supposed to say, "Oh, you fulfilled your obligation of mishloach manot. Very nice that you did that." But you don't usually say that. It's kind of obvious that why else am I bringing this to you if not to fulfill my obligation? Some people say that it was a question. What, you think you're fulfilling mishloach manot with that? And then what's the problem with what he sends? So maybe because one was wine and maybe you can't use wine. Maybe you can't use, I know we do use it, okay? But some people think maybe you can't. Some people say maybe he was just saying, you're a prominent person and it's not respectful for you to send me something so shvach like this. It's not really nice. It's a quarter of a, it's a leg of a calf and it's a small thing of wine. It's like a puny mishloach manot, not appropriate. And then it's all how you punctuate. Or maybe saying mishloach manot and matanot le'evyonim, like this is better, for you to give to a poor person, not to someone like me. And then in the Yerushalmi, you have a version where he actually sends more after that. And that's how he fulfills his obligation, because he then sends more, because what he said wasn't good enough. So anyway, there's all sorts of possibilities of how you could read this and what halachic conclusions you could come to. Rabba Shadolei Lemeri Barmar B'Yad Abai. Here comes the kind of funny story. And whether you learn something halachic from this or not is a very good question, or it's kind of just here to make you kind of smile. So Rabba sends, now who was Abaye? Abaye was adopted by Rabba because his parents died, his father when his mother conceived, his mother died in childbirth, and he's brought up by his uncle Rabba. And he's always known to be poor and he's a little bit food obsessed. And you'll see this from the story. If there's any better story than this is it. So Rabba sends to marry Barmar B'Yad Abaye. Okay, Abaye is his adopted son, so he sends him on his errands to give his mishlochei manot. He sends to marry Barmar Milo Taska de Kashba, a basket full of dates, Umelo Kasa Kimuchadav Shuna, and sweetened, like roasted flour, which is sweet. Amalei Abaye, he says, listen, Hashtamar Mary, when I get there, Mary's going to say, if a poor farmer becomes king, which is you, because you were poor, and then you became the head of the yeshiva. Now you're in this respectable position. But he never takes off the basket on his shoulders. In other words, you always look poor, because look what you're sending him, some pathetic mishloach manot. So the question is, does this show that you have to bring something more or not necessarily? Okay, right? And is this just Abaye's comments? You see the Rabbi actually doesn't change what he says. But anyway, it's a good question whether we learn this from this anything or not. When he gets to Mary Barmar's house, Mary Barmar gives him something to bring to Rava. He sends him a bag full of ginger and a bag full of long pepper. So Amar Abaye, Hashta Amar Mar, when I get back home, Rabba's going to say, I sent him something sweet and he sent me something spicy. That's not appropriate. Okay, so he has a lot to comment about everybody's food selections, right? Whether that person really would have said it or not is not clear. It's Abaye thinks that. So Amar Abaye. In addition, Abaye tells the following story. Kinaf Kimi Beimar, when I left Rabba's house, Hava Savan, I was very satisfied. I wasn't hungry at all, satiated. Kimate lahatam, when I got there to Mary's house, not only did he give me mishloach manot for Rabba, but he started feeding me food. Krivali sheet inside the sheet he gave me 60 plates of 60 different types of foods. V'achlebu sheet and pluga, and I ate 60 portions of them. Ubishula b'playta avakar sat likidar. The last thing was called pot roast. Ubai lemekasa batla. It was so good that I wanted to eat. I wanted to chew on the plate after it to get all the flavors out. Amar Abaye, Abaye now has to explain, how could this possibly be? He says, this is what people say. Poor people are so hungry, but they don't even know it sometimes, okay? So he was really hungry, even though he felt like he wasn't hungry. Inami, alternatively, there's always room for sweet things. There's always room for dessert, right? How many of us know this is true, right? You eat a huge meal. You're totally stuck. You can't eat a morsel, and then they bring out dessert, and somehow you have room for it. So it's interesting because this wasn't sweet, though, what he was eating. So it's a good question. But anyway, that's a funny line in the Gemara. Abaye bar Avin, Rabbi Chanina bar Avin, mechafes suudate lahadade. They would switch meals every year. Now, the question is, what does this mean? Does it mean every year they would eat at the other one's house? And then why on earth is the Gemara telling us this, right? Maybe Stam, they're just telling us that they were brothers, right? Because they were both bar Avin. Or alternatively, maybe they were poor, and the way they would fulfill their mitzvah, mishloach manot, was by giving a suda, right? I would make a meal. I would give it to my brother, and then my brother would give me his meal, and that's how we would fulfill mishloach manot without having to actually put out any money out of pocket because we couldn't afford it. It's another possibility. It obviously links, and this is another question about this. We normally a lot of people send junk food, right? But this maybe shows that the whole idea of mishloach manot is food for the meal. And some people, right, the best thing to do is when you're going to someone's meal, house for a Purim Suda, or even if you're not, send them food that will be a meal for them for the Suda Purim, and that is also maybe the best way to fulfill the mitzvah. So it's possible we can learn from here best ways to fulfill the mitzvah. It should be something respectable. There's a little debate. Is it respectable for who the sender is, or is it respectable for who's receiving it? In other words, let's say I don't have so much, but I'm sending it to someone who's an important person. Maybe I need to do a nicer one for them, right? Which is a little antithetical, right? You would think maybe the poor people should get better ones. It's a bit of a debate about this whole thing. Okay, Amal Rafa. If we're in an Iyun Shiur, we'd be able to go into this more in depth. Okay, another funny story, or not really so funny. Very famous line of halacha that's very difficult to swallow, which is, right, someone should, at least for me, not everybody has difficulty with this, but one is obligated to get drunk, right, to drink on Purim until the point where they can't tell the difference between Aror, Haman, Baruch, Mordechai. There's many who try to minimize this, not just my thinking, but that maybe you shouldn't get so drunk. Some people say ad velo ad bichlal, until the point where you're confused, but not at the point where you confuse them. Don't get too drunk, okay? That's a possibility. The real question is, what's this next story coming to say? Now, some people actually say this was said by Rava, and the next story happens with Rabba, with a hey, okay? Some people have the girsa that the halacha was said by Rabba also, and then maybe there's even a stronger connection between the story and the halacha. So Rabba v'Rabbi Zera abdu suda purim bahade hadade. They did Purim Suda together. Ibasim, they got drunk. So maybe this is proving the halacha that you're supposed to get drunk. But the end of the story is a little bit difficult. Kam Rabba Shachte Rabbi Zera. Rabba gets up at the Suda, he's drunk, and he slaughters Rabbi Zera. Now, the word slaughtering is a very strange use of the word. Some people have the version that it's not shachte with a shin, but sachte with a sin, with a samach, sorry. He hugged him in love and kind of strangled him, okay, to death. And some people say there's a very creative explanation that he was demonstrating how to do shchita on him and then accidentally killed him in the process, okay, because he was drunk. Anyway, there's a bunch of interesting creative interpretations to this story that I'm not going to get into now, but the next day, I guess once he was sober, he prays to God and he actually brings him back to life. The best part of this story is Lashana, the next year, Amar Le, so Rabbi says to Rabbi Zera, let's do Purim Suda together. To which Rabbi Zera says, Amar Le, lo b'chol shata v'shata mitrachish nisa. I'm sorry, but I don't rely on miracles happening all the time. Thank you, but no thank you. I have enough trauma from last year's Purim Suda. So the question is this coming to teach you you're supposed to get drunk, right? Look what happened. I mean, it is dangerous, but maybe, yes, get drunk, but note the dangers. Or maybe this is coming to say, it was nice he said this halacha, but look at this story and really maybe you shouldn't get drunk on Purim. Okay, so there's all different ways to interpret this. Ama Rava. Okay, Rava says, Sudat Purim shachla balayla lo yatsa yedecha bato. If you eat at night, you're not yotzei the mitzvah, right? You don't eat Purim night, meaning the night before. My time, what's the reason? Yemei mishteu simchachtiv. It says days of, right? Days of celebration, not the day, not the night. Rav Ashi Avayativ Kamei Rav Kahana, he was sitting before Rav Kahana, Nagal below Atu Rabbanan. They were sitting in the Beit Midrash and it's getting dark and nobody came to the Beit Midrash. Amar Le, Rav Kahana says to Rav Ashi, my time below Atu Rabbanan, Dilma Tride B'Sudat Purim. Why aren't they coming? Maybe they're busy with Sudat Purim. Sorry, that's what Rav Ashi says. Sorry, my mistake. Rav Ashi says this. Amar Le, Rav Kahana said, V'lo ava efshar l'michle ba'orta, what they couldn't have eaten yesterday at night. So Amar Le, lo shmiel lamar hadam Rava. What did you not hear? What Rava says that Suda Purim shachla b'layla lo yatsa yedei chavator. Rav Ashi says to Rav Kahana, have you never learned this halacha of Rava that you can't eat Purim Suda at night? They couldn't have eaten the night before. I think also the idea is if they were going to get drunk, better eat the night before than by the morning. They can come back to the Beit Midrash and learn. Amar Le, Amar Rava Hachi. Does Rava really say that? Amar Le, he says yes, he does. So Tanamine Arbin Zimnin Vidamile Kamandamanach Bekisa. So Rav Kahana goes over this halacha 40 times until he knows it right that you can't eat Purim Suda at night. Okay, moving on to the next, we're going to have two more Mishnayot now before the end of the daf. It's pretty late. We're going to try to get through them quickly. But before I have to mention this one thing, which is we're now going to have a slew of Ein Ben Zelazeh Elazeh. There's no difference between this and that except for one thing. And that matches, right, the Mishnah from before. And what do we have here? Basically, this is proof that the Mishnayot were said ba'al peh, first orally, and therefore they're connected by words that connect them. Okay, this happens in a whole bunch of Mishnayot. This is one of the classic examples because they're not connected even by topic. It's just that there's no difference between this and that other than that. So we're going to get way off topic of Megillah for a while, and then we'll get back. The only difference between Yom Tov and Shabbat is being able to prepare food. So the Gemara immediately says, based on this, you could say, the only difference is making food, but not preparation before you make the food. Like, for example, if your knife breaks, can you sharpen it? No, according to this Mishnah. If that's the case, because only the food prep itself, but not preparation for the food prep. So, matnitin deloka Rabbi Yehuda, our Mishnah must not match his opinion. Detanya ein ben Yom Tov l'Shabbat ela ochal nefesh. This is a braita that sounds just like our Mishnah, but Rabbi Yehuda matil af machshirei ochal nefesh. He says even more than that. My time is Tanakh. We're now going to see the proof of each one. Amar krahu v'lo machshirav. It says hu levado. It says you can do things for ochal nefesh in the pasuk. This only you will be able to do. So hu levado yaseh lachem. So we're going to dash the hu and then the lachem. Hu means hu v'lo machshirav, only food, but not food, right? The prep before the food. Rabbi Yehuda omer lachem l'chol tzorchechem. It says for you. For you means anything you need on that day, including, let's say, sharpening a knife. V'idach nami, now we're going to have the ping pong. What does he do with his verse? Haktiv lachem. So he says, lachem v'lo avdei chochavim, lachem v'lo l'klavim. You can't prepare food for a Gentile. You can't prepare food for a dog. V'idach nami haktiv hu. What does Rabbi Yehuda do with the hu? It seems like just the food and not anything else. Ktiv hu, ktiv lachem. He distinguishes between things that could have been prepared before Yantif. Even Rabbi Yehuda doesn't allow that. If your knife broke yesterday, you can't fix it today on Yantif. But if it broke today, you can fix it on Yantif. New Mishnah. The difference between Shabbos and Yom Kippur is you get skila on Shabbat, that's the court, versus Yom Kippur, where you get it bidei shamayim, correct. So halinyan tashlumin zev shavim. That means if you do, okay, we're not going to get into this whole thing now, but there's something called kimle b'dila b'mineh. If you do one act, and in that act you obligated also something very severe and something minor, like payment is less important, then you're only going to get the higher punishment. So what if it's karet, which is bidei shamayim? Does that override payment? Then you wouldn't have to pay money for it. So it sounds like l'inyan tashlumin, they'd be the same because the only difference is zebidei adam and zebidei shamayim b'karet. So they say mani manitin. If so, who's the Mishnah like? Rabbi Yechunya ben Akanei, Detanya, Rabbi Yechunya ben Akanei, Yaoseh Yom Kippurim kishabat l'tashlumin. Ma Shabbat mitchayev benafsho patur min hatashlumin. Af Yom Kippurim mitchayev benafsho patur min hatashlumin. Since you get a death penalty, it doesn't matter if it's only in the hands of God. You still are exempt from payment. Tnanatam. Now we're going to quote a Mishnah from Makot. Kochayve kritot shelaku niftelu midei kritatan. If you get karet, the court can also give you lashes for it. Okay, even though they can't institute karet, if there were witnesses and you were warned by witnesses, then you get lashes. If you get lashes, according to the Mishnah, you are exempt from karet. You basically remove the karet from you. So the way this is about lashes. Once you get lashes, you become achicha, you become part of the nation again, meaning you don't have karet. Tivra Rabbi Chanina ben Gambia. Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Chalukim alav chaverav Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel. Not everybody agrees with him. So Amarava, Amar Beirav, he's going to prove that not everyone agrees with him from our Mishnah. How so? Tanina, ein ben Yom Kippurim l'Shabbat. Ela shezez dono bidei adam v'zez dono b'karet. V'im iti bidei adami. If you can get lashes for something that you're obligated to karet, like Yom Kippur, then they're both bidei adam. They're both punishable by man. So that wouldn't be right? That's against our Mishnah. Two explanations for our Mishnah doesn't prove that. Amar Rav Nachman Hamani Rabbi Yitzchaki. You could say our Mishnah is Rabbi Yitzchak, who says, Amar, Malkot b'chayvi kretu leika. He thinks there is no malkot. Okay, you can't get lashes for something that you're obligated karet for. Titanya Rabbi Yitzchak Omer chayvi kretu b'chlalayu v'lama yatzat karet b'achoto leduna b'karet v'lo b'malkot. In the list of all the arayot, there's a list of. It says at the end you get karet for everything, and when it says your sister, if you sleep with your sister, you get karet. Why does it add it there? To say just karet for all of these and no extra anything. Last line, Rav Ashi Amar Afilu Tema Rabbanan Ze Ikar Zonobi de Adam Ze Ikar Zonobi Hikare. Rav Ashi says I can even explain the Mishnah according to the rabbis. Even if you can get lashes, still the main thing is karet. It's true you could get lashes and then be exempt from karet, but the main thing is really bidei shamayim, and that's karet. And with that, we'll end for today, and we'll start with the new Mishnah tomorrow. Totally new topic. Have a Shavua Tov, everybody.